Welcome, friends. I'm Yvonne Davis, author, astrologer, and life transformation coach. And welcome to my channel where I do general astrology and political astrology. So I want to start out by congratulating all of you because you are still here. That means you have survived 3 years of Donald Trump as president and you're still alive. And you haven't completely given up hope. You still think life is worth living. And not only that, but we are on the other side of the historic impeachment of Donald Trump. It's now an absolute historical fact, and that will never change. So no matter what happens with the trial or into the future, we can rest assured that we have now made it to this side. So we've really had three major successes. The first was the midterm elections in 2018, which was a blue wave. It was really, overall in the entire nation, it was a massive blue wave. We also, the Democrats were successful in the 2019 elections, and now we have this historic impeachment of Donald Trump. So just keep that in mind, because I know that going forward, we've still got a lot of stressful events ahead of us. But so I want to look at the charts, and I also want to give you some food for thought that I hope you will find encouraging. So one of the things is that there is a Republican Party, and I will see if I can find this for you. Let me, it's a group of Republicans. So I'm going to pull up the internet real quick. And I saw this on, I think it was a MSNBC interview with the author of this book, Running Against the Devil, Plot to Save America from Trump and Democrats from Themselves. Okay, I don't know what that means, but probably the fact that Democrats sometimes are not as good as fighting hard as the Republicans are. The Republicans, they're brutal. So anyway, this is a group of Republicans who are absolutely determined to stop Donald Trump from getting reelected. So that's good news, okay? And if you're curious about that, just do a search and you'll find the interview with this guy. So let's see, what else did I want to tell you about? Okay, you've probably seen in the news that although the impeachment vote passed, and it passed by a wide margin, yet Pelosi says that she isn't necessarily going to turn the articles of impeachment over to the Senate just yet for the trial. So that's really interesting, because that really came out of the blue. I don't think anybody was expecting that. And the idea is that they want to use that as leverage to get a fair trial, because, you know, McConnell has already said that he's basically just going to put a rubber stamp on Donald Trump and send him on his way. That's not justice. That's not a trial. So they do have some leverage there. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, especially with these January alignments. So let's see, there was one more piece of news I wanted to share, which was that there's still the case in the Southern District of New York regarding the associates of Rudy Giuliani, like Lev Parnas. And so you have to keep in mind that that case is still ongoing, and that hasn't gone away. And so now we are moving into 2020, and this is also going to be, in 2020 is an election year. So it is really going to be a wild ride. So let's go ahead and look at the alignments. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Donald Trump's chart, and I'm just going to do a quick review on the December new moon eclipse. I did a video on that recently, and I can put a link either above this one, or I I could put it at the end. So if you want more detailed information about that, I can give you that. But I mean, you can go back and look at that video. So this is just going to be a real quick review. So as you can see, he's got the Rack of Doom here with the quincunx on either side. That's blue lines, and then the oppositions in the middle. Those are the red lines. And so I think it's easiest when I'm looking at a chart to see what's happening in the center, because it definitely gives me an intuitive sense of what is coming for the person whose chart I am reading. And this kind of configuration called the Rack of Doom, and as I've said in many of my videos, if you have ever watched Game of Thrones and you're familiar with the Flayed Man, this is what they did to people during the Spanish Inquisition. They tied their arms and legs to what they called the Rack of Doom, and they would either stretch the person or do some kind of other torture, like flay them, which is really horrific. So that is not a favorable alignment. It's very difficult. And then, of course, we've got this very karmic alignment of the nodes in the new moon eclipse. The north node is on his Mercury in the 12th house, and it's also squaring, it's making a T-square to Neptune. And as I've said many, many times, this is why he is a pathological liar, because he has Mercury, which is a planet of communication, in the 12th house, which rules things that are hidden, which can also, the shadow side is lies, deceit, deception, mental illness. And it's squaring Neptune, which is the ruler of the 12th house, in his 3rd house of communication. And so this square is what makes him a pathological liar. And this is the karmic alignment here with the new moon eclipse, making a T-square and a conjunction on that natal square of his. So that's just the refresher. I'm not going to go into more detail about that, because you can look at that when you go to watch that other video that I made about that. Okay, so now I'm going to move forward to the January full moon eclipse. And one more thing I would like to say about this is that, you know, I had mentioned in my last video that the phone call July 25th phone call happened within the range of the July eclipses, which made it karmic. And just like setting up a long chain of dominoes, when you flick that first domino, which is that first karmic event, everything else, all the other dominoes fall into line, because that was a choice that he made. You know, that had nothing so much to do with the universe. It was him making a choice based on who he is, based on his character. He believes, because he's a narcissist, he believes that he can use the power of the presidential office to his own benefit by requesting, well, not just requesting, but bribing a foreign government to get involved in our elections. And so the thing is that, you know, some people might say, like Republicans might say, well, if there was corruption, then we need to know about it. Sure, let's know about it. You know, if there was corruption, if Biden was corrupt, let's know about it. That's not the problem. The problem is Donald Trump bribed a foreign government to get involved in U.S. elections for his own benefit. Not only that, but because they were bribed, that means that they're not motivated to actually uncover corruption. What they would be motivated to do is to do whatever Donald Trump wanted them to do. That's not the same thing as uncovering corruption. So let's just get clear on the facts here. Okay, now back to the chart. What we're seeing here is the full moon eclipse, and this is right over his vertex, which is fate and destiny. So he's got this fate going on. Now, of course, the thing to remember again is that these are the karma is activated by actions that he took. Okay. Now, when the eclipse lands right over his vertex, what that means is that the dominoes, as they're falling, will now land in such a way that something external is happening that is out of his control. We've already seen that with the impeachment, okay? So he set the dominoes in motion through that January 25th call, but the whistleblower's complaint was something fated and karmic that was external to him because he set those dominoes in motion. And then the impeachment was external to him. Again, it was in response to his karmic action. If he hadn't taken that action, these things would not be happening. So that's important to consider, that he set the dominoes in motion through that action. And then something else fated will happen with the full moon eclipse, which I think, based on what we know is coming, we can pretty much assume that this represents the trial in the Senate. It's something external to him that is fated. It's karmic. It's part of this whole karmic eclipse unfolding based on the actions that he took. And the dominoes are falling now. So since Pelosi has said that she won't necessarily turn the articles of impeachment over to the Senate until they feel confident that they can get a fair trial, I think the thing to think about with this is certainly that's part of the mix. There's no doubt about it. But how long can she hold it off? Yes, she has some leverage, she has some power, but the longer they hold off the trial, the more intense the pressure will become. And when you're looking at something like a full moon eclipse, the way a full moon eclipse works, it's like pressure on like if you've ever, snapped a branch, if you've taken a stick or something, you snapped it, it's like you're putting pressure and pressure and pressure and pressure until it cracks. And that's what a full moon eclipse is like. It puts pressure on something until something snaps, something breaks, okay? And it forces, because it's karmic, it forces, like the dominoes have to fall. That's why when I was predicting that the impeachment vote would occur around the same time as the full moon in Gemini in December, and then it happened, even though I said that like as far back as September, I think. And how could I have predicted that? It was like months away. But I knew because I was looking at the alignments and I thought, that's when the stick is going to break at that full moon, even though that full moon itself wasn't an eclipse, but the way it landed on Trump's chart, I knew that something was coming because full moons bring endings, culmination, finality, fruition. It's like something had to happen. The other shoe had to drop. And I knew that because I was looking at the alignments. And it's the same way with the January full moon eclipse. It's like you can only put that pressure on so long until that branch breaks. And it's the full moon eclipse that's going to cause it to break. So that's why I'm making a guess that, because I didn't know prior to, just recently, like I think they said it within 24 hours after the actual vote, they announced that they weren't going to turn the articles of the impeachment over to the Senate until they felt confident that they could get a fair trial. But Pelosi can only hold out so long. Something's going to break with this full moon eclipse. Okay, so just keep that in mind, because I do think that something has to happen. And we're talking about Donald Trump's karma right now. We're not talking about Pelosi. We're not talking. about her karma. We're not talking about Mitch McConnell's karma. We're not talking about the karma of the United States. We're just talking about Donald Trump's karma right now. And the full moon eclipse is right over his vertex, which is fate. So, and it's a full moon eclipse. So we know something is going to happen. Something's going to break at this moment. It's just like the pressure is just too intense. It's going to crack. I'm not saying that that's Donald Trump. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll have a nervous breakdown. Maybe he'll have a heart attack. Maybe he'll have a stroke. We don't know. But I'm thinking it's going to be something external to him, like the trial. Okay. So that's why I don't think Pelosi can hold out forever. I think this full moon eclipse will force it to happen. Okay, so again, you see these really intense alignments. We can still see the rack of doom. The opposition is getting even more intense with these red lines, and we're starting to see the formation of what's called the finger of God, with the quincunx on this side and the quincunx on that side. It forms what's called a yod, which is I think it's called isosceles triangle. I'm not a mathematician, so I may be saying that wrong. But anyway, when you have that triangle shape like that, and then you have the opposition in the center of it, it's called the finger of God. And I'm going to show you one more chart where it's even more obvious. And then we've got, again, the square of the nodes with the north node on Mercury, which is karmic. It's all about information. It's all about uncovering the truth. And the full moon in the 12th house is also about uncovering the truth. So something will come to light here. So it may just simply be that they finally announce that they're having the trial, or it may happen even prior to that. But the full moon, like every full moon, has a bell curve. So it usually, if the event is going to take place, it will take place very close to the full moon, but sometimes as early as 5 days prior or 5 days after. But basically, we are in eclipse season right now as I'm making this video on the 20th. The full moon, the new moon eclipse is on the 25th, and then we'll go 2 weeks to get to the full moon eclipse, and then 5 days out after that, while we're still in the waning side of that bell curve. So yeah, like I said, it could just simply be the announcement of the trial itself. But I think because this is personal to Donald Trump, it could also be some kind of information coming to light with the north node on his Mercury in the 12th house and the full moon eclipse in his 12th house, especially because it is close enough to Saturn that it's making conjunction to Saturn. So I think it could have something to do with the illumination of some kind of information that he may not want revealed. So that'll be really interesting too. Okay, so let me go ahead and take you to one more chart that I think you'll find really interesting. So I will bring that up for you because I mentioned that there was the finger of God. And so let's have you take a look at that. Okay. So here you can see it more clearly with that isosceles triangle. And those are the quincunxes. That's very karmic. It forces some kind of readjustment, like there's something not quite right that needs to be looked at. So over here in the 6th house, we've now got, we've already obviously passed the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is on January 12th, just 2 days after the full moon eclipse. So that energy gets tied together. And now here we are on November 3rd, which is Election Day, 10 p.m. Washington, D.C., because that's about the time that the polls will be closing on the west coast. So we see this cluster of planets, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter. Again, they're hovering right over his vertex. They're making a quincunx to his full moon and north node over here, and then another one to his Mars ascendant over here, and then in the center is that opposition. And that formation is called the finger of God, or also sometimes called a boomerang yod. Because whatever you've done, whatever karma you've created, it's coming back to haunt you. And if you haven't seen the video that I did on Paul Manafort, I suggest going back and looking at that, because he had a finger of God alignment in his chart, and we know what happened to him. He went to jail. So, so that's what we're seeing here. Okay. And also what we're seeing is Saturn is on the descendant, because we have the ascendant over here, we have the descendant over here, and in the election chart, it's squaring Mercury. So there's a T-square there with Mercury and Saturn. So Saturn's going to bring its harshness in. Saturn is hard, cold reality. Mercury is information, but in the case of an election night, the election is actually represented by Mercury itself, okay? Mercury rules the election, the planet that rules the election. So it's in square to Saturn, and that's the harsh, cold reality. And when they're in a square, again, there's a sense of pressure, and so that makes the feeling of facing up to harsh, cold reality feel even more difficult. I call it the Saturn squeeze, because it's really uncomfortable. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every person, even though it's a transit in the sky, that doesn't mean that every person will be feeling that personally. It really depends on how it's landing in a person's chart. And for Donald Trump, the ascendant is on his natal Venus, and in opposition to that, on the descendant, is Saturn. And Saturn not only brings us into harsh, cold reality, it also takes things away, okay? It removes things. It's contracting, it's limiting, it's filtering things out, it's getting rid of things. When it's on the descendant, that will tend to mean the removal of certain people in your life, because the descendant is the cusp of the seventh house. And the seventh house rules long-term meaningful relationships. It's the house of others, both, and that means all kinds of others, and that actually includes open enemies. And so it's the removal of people, but it's like across the board. It's not just removing a certain kind of person, okay? It's across the board, removal of people. And it's also, the seventh house is contractual relationships. So it's also, I call it the house of long-term meaningful relationships, because it includes any kind of relationship that is long-term and meaningful. And so with Saturn there on the descendant, it will indicate the removal of people from his life. So that could definitely be an indication of a loss of support. So I'm not going to make a prediction about whether or not he can win, because I'm not yet 100% convinced one way or the other. One of the reasons is because of the fact that he's having a North Node return, which is generally considered favorable. it can be an indication of important life events. But it doesn't tell us for a fact whether he will win or not win. So I'm holding off where that's concerned. What's also interesting is on election night, we also have a square of Neptune to the moon, and it's a continuation of the karma that this nation has been under for a long time. And so to show you that, I'm going to pull up the November election chart, November 8th, 2016 election chart, because what we see here is on election night, Neptune was conjunct the south node and the moon. And so that's all about deception. It's the deception of a nation. When you see that kind of alignment, that kind of conjunction, the night of the election, boy, it's very karmic for one thing. And for another thing, it was all about us learning about deception, about how we are deceived constantly, because we're seeing the revelation of that. It's not that this stuff has never gone on in the past. It has. It's just that now we're able to see it because it is so overwhelming. And of course, there are a lot of people who are completely blinded by the deception that's going on. So that was the karma of the nation on that election night. And then, of course, it turned out, Donald Trump got elected president, and here we are dealing with the repercussions to this very day. So let me go back to that other election chart, the one for 2020, and I'll show you how it's changed. So, okay, so real quick, take another quick look at that. Neptune conjunct the south node, which makes it karmic, and the moon, which intensifies it because the moon is emotion and subconscious. When the moon is conjunct Neptune, it intensifies Neptune's ability to pull the wool over our eyes, so to speak, and put us to sleep, and put us in a dream, and mystify things and confuse things. And so that brings in all the lying, the deception, and all of that we've been under for the past 3 years. So keep that in mind as I shift to the next presidential election night, election day, on in November of 2020. And now what we see is the moon conjunct the north node, squaring Neptune. So again, we've got the nodes involved because it's actually a T-square, as you can see here. Neptune is making a T-square to the nodes, and the vertex is over here. That's in Washington, D.C. And the moon is conjunct the north node over here. So again, once again, we've got Neptune involved, we've got the moon involved, and we've got the nodes involved. But this time, the moon is conjoining the north node and squaring Neptune. So it's a continuing unfolding of the karma that we're under as a country. But whether or not that means we'll have to face this ongoing deception, or whether or not this square will break the spell of that deception, I don't know, because of the fact that Neptune is so tricky, and the moon also represents the public, the people. So I'm hoping, obviously, that means that we, as a nation, that we wake up, we get out from under that spell, that drug that this nation has been under, being drugged by the lies and the deception. But it is interesting because there's no doubt in my mind that it has something to do with that karmic unfolding about the whole thing about how we're lied to, how we're deceived. And so the real question in my mind is, does this mean we've woken up, that we're ready to wake up? So we'll see. Okay, so I think that's pretty much enough. So that, again, that was a refresher of the new moon eclipse on the 25th. The full moon eclipse, which, as I said, no matter what Pelosi is doing right now, I don't think she can hold out with that upcoming full moon eclipse. I think there's something about that that's going to force her hand. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully because they will get a promise of a fair trial. Now, whether or not the Republicans and Mitch McConnell fall through on that, we don't know. But I think it will. Just the full moon eclipse itself will force her hand. And then I give you a little view of the election chart in 2020. Just in case you're wondering, I do think that this something about Donald Trump's karma is going to spill over into the entire year 2020, because that's the way eclipses work. Most new moons and full moons, whatever they're bringing, it unfolds within the 2 weeks or month period of the lunations, whereas with eclipses, they take much longer to unfold. They can take up to 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes even longer than that for the karma to fully unfold. So we will definitely be seeing whatever's happening now with the eclipses. That karma won't resolve itself in January. It will spill over to the entire year 2020. So there's an entire year of karmic unfolding, not just for Donald Trump, but for the nation. So we'll see. Okay, I think that's it for now, and hope that was helpful. And as always, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, share with friends and family and on social media, and leave your comments below. And I will talk to you again soon.